After last week's next-gen test at Charlotte, Denny Hamlin says once again that the speeds are too high if the goal is to achieve pack racing at intermediate tracks. How's it going, y'all? My name is Eric. Welcome to Out of the Groove. I hope you've had a great week. I won't have an episode up tomorrow because it is Thanksgiving, so I want to wish everyone a very happy Thanksgiving. But before we break out the turkey and mashed potatoes, we've got a lot of news to cover today. I'm gonna rapid fire go through a few stories real quick because I want to spend most of this episode reacting to a recent article and some of Denny Hamlin's most recent thoughts. So let's begin. Firstly, Mike Harmon was assessed an L2 penalty this week for violating the section of the rulebook regarding vehicle testing. He will lose 75 driver and 75 owner points at the start of the 2022 season. And Ryan Bell, the crew chief for Mike Harmon Racing, was fined $50,000 and suspended for the next 6 races. This comes after Mike Harmon Racing ran one of their Xfinity Series cars at Rockingham recently during some sort of charity event. This comes as a result of Mike Harmon Racing driving an actual NASCAR Xfinity Series car at Rockingham Speedway for a recent charity event. And before any of you try to say, oh, where's the proof? Show me the proof. Mike Harmon Racing posted the evidence on social media. They quite literally snitched on themselves. The NASCAR rulebook is pretty clear. You cannot test a car at a non-NASCAR sanctioned test. So I think the penalty is fair. Mike Harmon Racing said that they're going to appeal the penalty. There's of course the possibility they can get the hefty penalty reduced, but I don't know that they'll fully wiggle themselves out of this one. It seems like just an honest oversight in my opinion. They had 2 cars at this charity event. One was obsolete, was not against the rules as far as I can tell, but the second one apparently is a car that raced, it sounds like fairly recently, so that's where NASCAR more than likely took exception and is the reason the penalty is showing up. It's a strict penalty. It's a really harsh penalty for a small team like Mike Harmon Racing, but the rulebook's pretty black and white on this one. I don't know what's going to happen as a result of the appeal, but that was some big news this week. Posting the evidence on social media yourself, that's a new one. Other penalty news announced this week. Cesar Baccarella, NASCAR driver and actually now a NASCAR Xfinity Series team owner, was suspended indefinitely for violating the sport's substance abuse policy. No further details were given, but it's worth mentioning that Tommy Joe Martins, who's the other owner of Alpha Prime Racing, the Xfinity Series team, he and Cesar Baccarella are co-owning that team starting this coming season. He tweeted that it's all fine, it's all good. The team released this statement saying that Cesar had unknowingly taken a workout supplement on the banned substances list and he is fully compliant with NASCAR and is already in the Road to Recovery program. The team does not expect him to miss any time as a result of this failed test, but that was some big news as well this week. Moving from the Xfinity to the Truck Series, Spire announced this week that they are opening a Truck Series team this year. I didn't see any confirmation that this will be a full-time team, but at the very least it'll be a part-time effort. Bono Mannion will be the crew chief apparently. The team did not announce who their driver will be for next season, although it's worth mentioning in their initial announcement, one of the co-owners of Spire Motorsports specifically mentioned how good Bono Mannion's been with developing young talent. Makes you think that maybe they're going to put a younger driver in that seat. I don't know who it could be. There's a lot of good young talent out there, but what about a guy like Landon Castle? He's not old by any means. I was looking at Spire Sports and Entertainment's website and they actually represent Landon Castle. He's one of their clients. And earlier this week, Adam Stern from Sports Business Journal tweeted about the cryptocurrency industry backing Landon Castle, Voyager wanting him to be in a winning car next season. So I don't know, maybe that makes some sense, but I don't know. Who do you think could get that Truck Series ride for Spire? There are a lot of options on the table. Some drivers even from the Cup Series this past year that don't currently have plans set for next season. Let your imaginations run wild. Shifting to the Cup Series, yesterday Richard Petty Motorsports announced they had landed a major new sponsor. Focus Factor will reportedly sponsor Eric Jones for 26 races next year. This is apparently a multi-year deal as well. I've seen a lot of people on social media raising the alarm about maybe the legitimacy of a company like this. I cannot speak to that, but the car looks decent. I know I ranted earlier this week about next-gen paint schemes needing to take advantage of all the extra space there on the door, and I think this paint scheme actually in that respect does a pretty good job. So respect to the designer there and respect to the sponsor and team for playing along as well. Look, I don't know anything about the company, but if this is legitimate, which I have no reason to believe that it isn't, that's a pretty huge deal for Richard Petty Motorsports. Getting some consistent funding next season from a new partner, a new sponsor, that's huge for Petty and for Eric Jones. All right, now that we've caught up on all the biggest news, I want to spend the last few minutes of this video talking about the next gen car. I know last week, of course, we talked about the 2-day oval test at Charlotte Motor Speedway, and I talked about it then. The biggest things I was looking for in those tests were, can they fix the steering issues? Can they fix the overheating issues? And it sounds like, based on driver feedback, based on reports, that those issues have largely been resolved. So that's huge. Now, like I said in that video last week, we can begin to shift our attention towards how these cars are actually going to race, specifically at intermediate ovals. So I want to raise this question to NASCAR and all of NASCAR's executives. What the hell is the goal? We'll go through some of it in a moment, but I read a great article this week by Bozy Tatarovich. And then last night in a Twitter space, Racing Spaces, Denny Hamlin apparently, and I say apparently because I did not hear this part live, but I read the transcription later and heard some commentary on it later. Hamlin apparently said in regards to the recent Charlotte Next Gen test, if we want pack type racing, we're still going too fast. And fans are gonna hate that. We gotta figure out what we want first and build a package for that. That caught my attention because that's very similar to comments Hamlin made a couple months ago after Atlanta Motor Speedway announced that they were increasing the banking for next year. He said the same thing back then, and he basically pleaded with NASCAR executives to collaborate with the drivers, or at least hear what the drivers had to say, get their feedback. And the fact that he said that a couple months ago, and now he's saying that again this week, and there's been a couple of next gen tests in between, that makes it sound like nothing has changed, that there still isn't a dialogue between the drivers and NASCAR itself, and the drivers, according to Denny Hamlin, are just as frustrated and confused as they were months ago. So that's why I'm asking NASCAR, what is the plan? What do you actually want racing at mile and a halves to look like? Because it sounds like whatever was tested at Charlotte last week was not popular with drivers. So now let's talk a little bit about that Bozy article. In it he writes, drivers we spoke to were mostly pleased with how the cars drove on their own. Previous issues like the lack of steering response appear to have been improved thanks to collaborative efforts between the teams, NASCAR, and the vendors. Drivers felt the new cars were more challenging to drive, but many were not pleased with how they drove in traffic and the impacts of dirty air. I showed y'all a clip during my video last week where it looked like, I think Harvick or whoever was in the 4 car seemed to get really tight behind the 22. And I said then that, it's a test. Maybe he hit the brakes. Maybe he's being really careful, really cautious. But I also said then, maybe it was the dirty air. But I didn't want to look at that test too closely when it came to how the cars actually raced around each other. Now, hearing what the drivers say, the drivers may not be pushing it 100%, but they have a better feel for what's happening in the car than we do watching from afar. Hearing that the drivers were concerned with dirty air, and then looking back at a replay, a clip like that raises more questions. Now, going back to that article, which I'll link in the description below, Bozy also mentions that the current next-gen cars, at least during this test, were riding really high. The ride height was high. And he writes about how NASCAR and the teams may change that. According to sources in the garage, NASCAR might be looking at allowing the cars to be lower and changing one or both of these devices in order to help them race better. It makes sense. The next gen is heavily dependent on the flat floor and the underwing for downforce. Having the car so high off the ground likely impacts how effective those components are. So perhaps there's still room to improve the balance, room to improve how these cars handle in dirty air. But now let's go back to Denny Hamlin's comments. If NASCAR really wants pack racing at the intermediates, they're gonna have to radically change even further how these cars drive. As things sit right now with the next gen car, it appears the dirty air effects are about as prevalent as ever. And let me just say, the last thing anyone wants to see, fans, drivers, anyone, is dirty air playing an even larger role in the actual racing. We've heard some really good things about how the next gen car drives. It's more symmetrical, less side force. Drivers have said it's more challenging. Ross Chastain noted during this test last week that there was a couple seconds of tire fall off throughout his run. A lot of longtime NASCAR fans will love hearing that, but what no fans are hearing at all right now is a clear vision from NASCAR, or from the teams and drivers for that point. Nobody seems to be on the same page about what the racing at intermediates will look like. I think Denny Hamlin and I, and many of you, are thinking the same thing. I think NASCAR does kind of want to make a lot of the mile and a halves, like Atlanta, Texas, Charlotte. I think they do want those tracks to look kind of like Daytona and Talladega, but they're afraid of coming right out and saying it. And that's the most frustrating part. Look, I may not agree with turning every mile and a half into a super speedway, but I'll be completely honest, I think I'd rather see that than see more of what we've seen in the last couple of years on mile and a halves. Cars super stable, still strung out, dirty air affecting the ends of these races. Like, honestly, enough of that. I'd rather see super speedway racing. But if that actually is the goal, if the actual goal is to turn all these mile and a halves into baby super speedway races, I have to question it. Like, remember, was it 2 years ago, Steve Phelps said that, hey, we may have in the past made mistakes chasing the casual fan at the expense of the existing fan. We strayed too far from our roots. We're not going to do that again. It was like 2 years ago that Steve Phelps was saying this. I'll give NASCAR some credit for adding more short tracks and short ovals to the schedule, as well as some road courses and tracks in new trending markets like Nashville and Austin. Like, I'll give NASCAR a ton of credit for that. But intermediate ovals still make up a huge chunk of the NASCAR schedule. And if you're going to turn all those into super speedway races, That's too much. Look, I love super speedway racing, but you can't have ice cream for every single meal. The fact that the next gen era is here and drivers are still concerned and confused with the direction that NASCAR is heading at the intermediates, that is a concern, without a doubt. That's questionable. Obviously, we're just gonna have to wait for the first intermediate race of the year to get an idea of what this car is gonna do, how these things are gonna race, but I don't like the uncertainty of it right now. That's all I wanted to talk about in this video here today. Thank you guys so much for watching. Share your thoughts, your concerns down in the description below. I know people from NASCAR watch these videos sometimes. If fans have actual concerns, maybe this will encourage NASCAR to be a little more transparent about their intentions at these types of racetracks. And NASCAR, if you do make a big statement, please don't cite the fan council survey as, oh, fans like this style of racing. Please cite anything else, please. For the love of all that is holy, don't quote the fan council. We know it's a sham. We know those questions are bogus. Anyway, thank you all so much for watching this video. I appreciate the support. Be sure to hit that subscribe button if you're new to the channel. As always, a huge thank you to my amazing Patreon supporters as well. Couldn't do this show without your continued support every single month, all year long. I greatly appreciate it. Again, since I don't think I'll see you tomorrow, have a happy Thanksgiving, everyone. I'll see you again later this week. Take care, everyone. Be safe out there.